Welcome everyone to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast, the podcast focused on leadership. The episode will begin shortly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Dr. John Bedker Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, John Bedker. Well, today we're going to talk about a person we've spoken about before, Steve Kerr. Yep, the NBA coach, the basketball legend, and most importantly, an exemplary leader. So, why are we going to talk about him? Well, he recently gave a speech, actually this week, at the Democratic National Convention, their nominating convention in Chicago, Illinois. He also just recently returned from Paris, France, where he was the coach of the gold medal winning U.S. Olympic men's basketball team. So, on quite a series of leadership highs at the moment, but I thought that his speech was particularly important. It is what this podcast is all about. He spoke directly and pointedly about leadership. So without the political connection, I really want to make the leadership connection for each of you. Okay, I'm going to quote several things that Steve Kerr said at his speech in Chicago this week. I did my best to scribble them down, so if I'm off by a word or two, my apologies up front, but I think that I have it quite accurately. All right, the introduction, pretty simple. We know Steve Kerr. He's been the focus of a previous Dr. John Bedker Leadership podcast. His backstory is incredible. Growing up in the Middle East, his family, his friends, his schooling. It is a compelling backstory for the development of one of our country's really exemplary leaders. So, more currently, what do we know? Steve Kerr, of course, 9-time NBA champion. And, as I mentioned moments ago, he now is the Olympic gold medal basketball coach. How did he begin? How did he begin his speech? It tells you something about leadership right up front. He started by saying, "What an amazing vibe," quote. "What a winning spirit I feel surrounded by." This is something that leaders want to do. Be present about their situational awareness and understand the moment that they are in and communicate that positivism when it is present. He certainly felt that at the Olympics, and he continued to feel that as he was asked to come and speak at the DNC convention in Chicago. Well, he began his comments to the audience by saying that 12 American men, that's the Olympic basketball team, 12 American men came together to win Olympic gold. So he set the tone from the beginning about excellence and success. Aspirations that all leaders want to think about when they are leading. 12 American men came together to win Olympic gold. The very next statement, though, is not about him or those that he coached. The very next statement in his speech is this, quote, "The next night, I was back at the arena, watching the American women do the same thing." So spread the wealth. This is an important leadership concept. Recognize that there are many things to celebrate. As Steve Kerr said, after winning the Olympic gold medal, the next night he's right back in the arena. and watching the women do the same thing, win Olympic gold. His comments then go on to say, I cannot think of a better metaphor for what this country, meaning the United States, I cannot think of a better metaphor for what this country is all about than the ways Team USA came together at the Olympics. Think about those words. Those words have real and significant meaning. The ways that Team USA came together at the Olympics. Folks, when you listen to an exemplary leader, you really have to listen because their words are profound. So then he went back to say, why would I come and speak at a political convention? That's not me. That's not who I am. I'm a basketball coach. And he said, quote, the reason I said yes to speaking here tonight is because I believe in a certain kind of leadership. So he tells you up front, this is not about politics. This is about leadership. I only came here tonight because I believe in a certain kind of leadership. And he ticks off a number. And I'm going to read you them. They really are important leadership competencies. They're a demonstration for all of us to try to emulate. First, Steve Kerr. I believe leaders must display dignity. So think about that. Very first thing, displaying dignity. It's not talking about analytics, for instance, capacity to digest a spreadsheet, to analyze numbers. Hugely important skills. Hugely important. Please don't hear anything different. But for him, the priority, the number one, is I believe leaders must display dignity. Second, I believe that leaders must tell the truth. Now, how many times have we talked about that, folks, here on the Dr. John Bedker Leadership Podcast? Truth. Really, really important. The foundation of trust is telling the truth. Third, I believe that leaders should be able to laugh at themselves. Think about that. And again, these sort of what one might describe as soft leadership skills are not that at all. They're actually profound. They're challenging. They're difficult. This capacity for a leader to laugh at themselves, hugely important. I believe that leaders should be able to laugh at themselves. Next, Steve Kerr says, I believe leaders must care for and love those they are leading. Think about that language, that word. He's not overstating. It's not hyperbole. To him, it's genuine. It is authentic. He actually cares deeply. His word, love those you are leading. So that commitment and connection piece for a leader, so hugely important. And Steve Kerr says it as one of his foundational leadership cores. Next, he says, I believe leaders must have knowledge and expertise, but understand that none of us has all the answers. Really, really important. Because when you talk to those you serve, you should not only listen and hear those words, but you really need to understand what they're telling you. That meaning, that sense and meaning making are hugely important for leaders. In fact, Steve Kerr goes on to say, some of the best answers come from members of the team. Again, just what we're saying. Here's what we need to do to win the game. And someone says something, a team member, a player in this case. some of the best answers come from members of the team. He's not only aware of that, but he hears that. He makes sense and meaning of it and incorporates it in the path forward. You should look for these qualities, Steve Kerr says, in your friends, in your boss, your mayor. And he goes on to state then, and shouldn't you look for these same qualities in your president? Folks, that answer is pretty clear, isn't it? Leaders, Steve Kerr says, devote themselves to serving others. Not about yourself, but serving others. I've spoken about this. My class at the U.S. Naval Academy has our own little saying for our year. Non-sibi. Not for self. That is a core leadership competency. Leaders should devote themselves to serving others, really believing in that, executing that. Folks, this speech by Steve Kerr was really, really profound. I encourage everyone to do a little YouTube or Google search and listen. The joy, compassion, and commitment we saw at the Olympics is what Steve Kerr wants to highlight in his speech. But he goes on to say it's more than that. It's not just about the game. It's not just about the Olympics, about that joy and compassion, that commitment that we all saw at the Olympics. But he says it's also about who we choose to vote for in November. Steve Kerr. The Harris-Walz ticket has that. Okay. It's about what our country needs. And Steve Kerr makes it crystal clear. He says we need leadership. Goes on then to say we need real leadership. The job is about leadership. And as most of you know that have been listeners regularly, I've spoken about this in 2 recent podcasts. Not the kind of leadership, though, that seeks to divide us, but recognizes and celebrates our common purpose. Common purpose. Think about that as understanding, recognizing, and addressing in your leadership role. Think about, Steve Kerr says, think about what 12 people coming together did at the Olympics. Now, think about what 330 million Americans coming together could achieve. Not as Democrats, not as Republicans, not as libertarians or any political party, but as Americans. Steve Kerr makes that point, and it is spot on. Who knows, this is what he says about who we should pick. Who knows that this nation's greatness does not come from any one of us, but from each of us doing our part to build a more perfect union. So again, this notion of non-sibi, not for self, but for others. This leader who knows that this nation's greatness does not come from any one of us, but from each of us, the collective, doing our part to build a more perfect union. This notion of democracy, folks, is not given. It's earned. It must be defended. We all need to contribute. We all need to recognize and make clear that we should have a common purpose to build a more perfect union. That vision, Steve Kerr says, is what leadership is all about. And of course, folks, as we know, it's what this podcast is all about. what each and every one of us should try to be about every day, to the best of our abilities, to do the right thing. That's what the Dr. John Bedker Leadership Podcast is about. Let me just quickly review those points that I think are particularly present and Steve Kerr gave directly in his speech this week. First, I believe leaders must display dignity. Second, I believe that leaders must tell the truth. Third, I believe that leaders should be able to laugh at themselves. Fourth, I believe leaders must care for and love those they are leading. And fifth, I believe leaders must have knowledge and expertise, but understand that none of us has all the answers. So, following this hugely, I thought, great performance by the United States, but great experience by France and the presentation of the Olympics. It was really quite an Olympics this year, 2024. But here comes Steve Kerr after winning the gold medal to be asked to come and speak at the Democratic National Convention. He does that and says, I'm not here to talk about politics. I'm not here to do that. I'm here to tell you about leadership and how that should inform who you vote for. He gives these 5 points, and I'll tell you folks, each and every one of us needs to take a moment to think about Steve Kerr, the exemplary leader, and the points he makes, because leadership today could not be more important. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Take care. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tell your friends, and, of course, please follow our podcast and subscribe. Thank you again for tuning in.